You are listening to Methods Build What's Next Digital Product Perspectives, presented by Global Logic. At Method, we aim to bridge the gap between technology and humanity for a more seamless digital future. Join us as we uncover insights, best practices, and cutting-edge technologies with top industry leaders that can help you and your organization craft better digital products and experiences.
So my name's Dave Goddard. I'm an Englishman. I've been in the US for 30 or more years now, so I sound Australian because I'm picking up most of your accent. I began in California in high tech, and then 6 or 7 years ago, moved over to the industrial sector. I now am head of digitalization for a company called Hitachi Energy, which is a sister company of Method and Global Logic in the Hitachi group of companies. And I can introduce Hitachi Energy if you like.
Yes, please.
So Hitachi Energy is an electrification company. What we do is we build the infrastructure that interconnects the power grid and allows connectivity to the power grid. So new battery energy systems and so on and so forth. Our mission fundamentally is to drive a renewable energy future for everyone. We're a global company, 45,000 strong internationally. And as you drive down the street and you look at the electrical infrastructure, those big gray substations beside the highway, that's what we do. The interconnection of wind farms, the interconnection of offshore platforms, the interconnection of data centers into the grid. We'll talk a bit about that, I imagine. That's what we do. My job is to drive the digital enablement of that system, along with a large global team virtually that I work with to help us drive agility and flexibility and resiliency into the infrastructure as it changes. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. So thank you for being here again. This is just very exciting, new format and all. So I'm Brittany Stone. I work here at Method. I've been a consultant in the digital transformation space for about 15 years now. One of the things I really like about being a consultant is you get to see lots of different industries. You get to go deep on lots of different problems in kind of a short period of time. But interestingly enough, I never came to the energy space until relatively recently. So I've only been doing work with the energy industry for about 3-ish years. And when I got my first energy project, it was while I was here at Method. And everybody's watching, and it's so cheesy to say, but I didn't feel like I was surprised at how much I just fell in love with it and have wanted to stick with it. And I think part of that is kind of because on its face, it feels like we're at the front line of so many of the planet's, so many of humanity's biggest problems. And it feels like you can actually make a really meaningful difference and sit at that table and in a really impactful kind of a way. And I also just always find something new to learn about. Like there's very rarely a time where I'm like talking to a utility or talking about a utility's problems that some sort of fun fact comes that doesn't just blow my mind. So I feel like there's always something to learn. And I'm wondering, you said you were in this industrial space for 6-7 years. Why energy? Why do you stay? What do you find interesting about this space?
Yeah, all the same reasons, really, right? It's kind of unusual. Kind of unusual to find a role or a task or a mission that translates across so many generations, right? A sustainable future is so vital to all of us and to everyone we leave behind. So, when I was talking to my teenage daughter about what I do and why we do it, she gets it, right? And there are gentlemen I was just talking to who are already retired and interested in understanding more about what's going on. It's so consequential to our society internationally. I think that's what energizes all of us, right? It's really interesting. The other thing is it's real time. The impact we're driving is happening today. And, you get a lot of return, emotional return on that as well. So that's why I was in high tech. High tech does a lot of enabling, but not a lot of outcomes. And to be able to actually get to the outcome and deliver the value it's powerful.
Yeah,
It's tough not to get really bought into that.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I always talk about like saving the world one workshop at a time, but it like literally feels like that. Like every time you help somebody like align towards a problem and, mobilize a solution, it just like feels the warm and fuzzies. But I know we're here to talk about like AI specifically and not just the energy space. But before we do, I know we have a lot of people who are probably listening to this or attending that don't really know anything about the energy industry. And so I do, before I ask my first question about AI, want to kind of give an explainer about the basics. And you'll realize why I'm very fun at cocktail parties in about 3 minutes. So when I first, came to an energy project, I never stopped to think ever about what has to happen behind the scenes when I go into a dark room and I flip a switch, or I, plug my computer in to charge it, or I, beep, 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 boop on my, washing machine. Like you're just doing the task. It's a very seamless thing you don't really think about. And so that was the very first thing that ever blew my mind, was like all of the things that have to go exactly right for that experience to be seamless. So we're going to like do the energy version of how a electron becomes okay, well, that metaphor doesn't really work. I don't know what the output is, the thing you're trying to do.
I'm fascinated by this as well.
All right, just hang with me. All right, so it starts with a power plant. Power plant is going to take your raw fuel. It could be wind, it could be solar, nuclear, natural gas, coal. It's probably coal. And it's going to take that stuff, and the power plant turns it into electricity. The electricity is then stepped up in voltage, because I don't know why, but sure, because it needs the higher voltage makes it easier to transport that energy very long distances with less loss between point A and point B. So it's traveling at a very high voltage in those like really big lines that you see. Then from there, it goes into a substation. So you think about like a site with lots of equipment, and that equipment's job is to step it down, to take the voltage from a high voltage to a less high voltage, to then move it again. But now you're moving it in a different kind of line. It's a distribution line now, and it's not a transmission line. So you get the distribution line, and those are the ones that you see like in your neighborhood. So you have like the wooden poles, and those are your distribution lines. And then on some of those wooden poles, you'll see like a little box. And that little box is a transformer, and it steps it down again and takes the voltage down so that it's usable by your household appliances. And that's when you get to actually use it. But when you go and you flip the switch in your dark room, it seems dumb to say, but that light that comes on travels at the speed of light. With some gray area. It's like 90% the speed of light for reasons. And so when you flip on that light, all of that energy has to already be generating in order for it to happen seamlessly for you. Because if you generate too little and too many people flip on switches that they weren't prepared for, that's how you get blackouts. That's bad. But if you have too much, lots of other complicated things happen. So either it goes into an inverter, it goes into a battery, or you have to like manipulate the frequency on the transmission lines to do, I don't know, science things to make that happen. But the end result usually is that you waste it. And so now you've burned too much coal, and it's not like we have like tons of it. I mean, we do have tons, literally, but you know where I'm headed. So you don't want to waste the fossil fuels. You don't want to over-generate. And then when you have renewables, a coal plant, you can like turn it on when you have more demand, and you can turn it down when you have less demand. So all of that forecasting to know exactly just right what everyone is going to do, which flips, which switches they're going to flip, which computers they're going to turn on, energy consumption of different appliances, like all of that forecasting you have to try and get just right all the time to minimize the waste and to not have blackouts. And then with renewables, you can't turn up the sun and turn it down based on supply and demand and forecasting. So it adds an additional level of complexity. So those are the basics of managing the energy grid. And all you did was walk into a dark room and go, I need to find my thing. How'd I do? Well, okay.
It was generally very good. Can I add a couple of layers of complexity though?
Of course, but I would love to ask a question that maybe you can weave that in.
Yeah.
Because my big question, firstly, about AI is like, if this industry has been managing those kinds of complexities for so long, so well, without AI, what is it about now that is driving us towards using AI to do that?
That's a great question. This, by the way, is fairly freeform. I don't know these questions before they come, but that actually leads directly to the additional complexity I wanted to add. So the description was very good, right? However, if we think about how that power has historically been generated, what we're essentially doing is using steam, and we're generating that steam in very many different ways, right? From nuclear through oil and coal. We're using it to turn large, heavy metal turbines, and it's those turbines that generate the electricity. Fair? Our grid, which, by the way, not so very long ago was chosen as the most significant innovation of the 21st century, is fully interconnected. And it's really a physics problem that we're solving, as was described, right? So line losses over time, I've got to put the right amount in so the right amount comes out, and I've got to be able to predict how much that is so that I put the right amount in. Think about it as water flowing into and out of a swimming pool as opposed to something like telephone lines, right? So these heavy cylinders that are rotating carry what we call mechanical inertia. And because of the physics of the movement of electrons in the grid, they are actually self-balancing because they are all spinning within a certain amount of phase and cycles of one another. They automatically bring stability to the grid. And what that has meant is over the last many decades, the actual grid itself is a fairly fundamentally stable thing. What happens then if you add destabilizers to that grid? One of the destabilizing events actually is to remove that mechanical inertia, right? These things are heavy iron that we spin. Wind farms, well, they do have some rotating machines, but those are designed actually to have minimal inertia so that the wind can turn them when the wind is only light. And solar panels, they have no moving parts. There is no inertia. So as we add more and more of some of the renewable sources that we're using today, hydro, renewable, is spinning large heavy metal turbines, right? But as we add more wind and as we add more solar, we're actually pulling out of the grid the very things that were stabilizers for the grid. So that's one thing, right? And so the question you asked was, why? Then why do we need AI now? We need AI now because the grid was generally a fairly static place, massively complex problem that our energy customers were solving for, which is the balancing of supply and demand and getting the right amount of energy at the right level to the right place at the right time. Massively complex problem, but it was a day ahead problem. Now they have a problem where the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, the wind increases, the sunshine decreases. And you made the point that we ramp up and ramp down coal power stations. No, we don't. Coal power stations take days to ramp up and ramp down. So it's not like we're sliding a knob to adjust, right? Gas-powered stations, they can ramp up much more quickly, but they still take hours, not minutes and seconds. So what's changed fundamentally in the grid is the rate of change in the grid, right? We move from basically making adjustments on a daily basis to making adjustments on an hourly basis, to making adjustments every minute, to making adjustments in a time frame that, frankly, human beings are not designed to deal with, right? And so how do you solve that problem? AI. So that's really the answer. It's the nature of what's going on in the grid that's driving adoption of, let's call it automation, to help human beings manage this now extremely dynamic environment. Boy, that was a long answer. Sorry about that.
But an interesting answer. Long's not bad. Gotta get the complexities out. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time, probably too much time thinking about, is the snowball effect of AI, because these AI models require an absolutely inordinate amount of energy just to run them. And so you have this increasing complexity that you have with the grid and different factors, and the pace of change is accelerating, and all of those things are true. And so it makes us want to use AI to help us. But the more we put AI models into play, the more energy and strain is required from our grid infrastructure. And it's not like utilities are the only ones who are employing these models. So like you have this exponential curve of all of these AI models wanting to come online, and that's increasing the speed with which data centers are coming on, which is requiring additional grid infrastructure to be put in the ground in ways that they've never had to go that fast. And it's the construction, it's the site planning, it's the site design, it's the poles and wires, it's all of the materials and bringing that stuff to bear and getting that stuff out into the field and employed. And so it's the forecasting, like everything becomes more complicated. Everything starts to ramp up fast. And then you, of course, need more AI models to help with that complexity. And it's like this self-reinforcing cycle. So like how could we possibly keep pace?
Wow. So what you're really describing is what's happening in the data center market, right? So we have seen more and more and more and more adoption of streaming, and streaming requires data centers that are physically quite close to the place you're consuming that feed, right? So the data center market started growing. We're seeing more and more, as you quite rightly say, adoption of AI and compute, right? The need for compute. And then, of course, most recently, generative AI and the GPUs that are the gaming computers that are used to run these generative AI models, they actually consume significantly more power and generate much more heat. So they actually need a lot more cooling, which in itself takes power. So we're seeing this massive ramp in data centers. That's been accelerated by the adoption of generative AI. To give you some idea of the scale of that statement, if you look at what NVIDIA is projecting about the sale of their GPUs over the next few years, if you take the total number of devices they expect to sell and you total up the consumption of energy required to run those devices in data centers, it's the equivalent of putting a small country the size of the Netherlands into the grid every year. We're adding a new country's worth consumption just in GPUs associated to Gen AI.
That is wild.
So for our utility customers, the growth in the data center market is, of course, a boon, right? It's a boon for all of us, but it means the interconnection of those data centers becomes one of their biggest problems. Do I have enough power? Do I have that power in the right place? The actual biggest single problem is permitting. Do I have the authority to run power to the place I need to run it? So the growth of the data center market absolutely being driven by Gen AI is a huge challenge and, of course, a huge opportunity for utilities and anyone in the power industry.
So I know we're just at the very beginning, nascent stages of AI. What's like something cool that you think, or a couple of things that you think are cool that might surprise people that we can already do?
Well, we use AI today to solve the problem you first began with, which is how do I project accurately how much power I'm going to need and when and where I'm going to need it, right? So that used to be a mathematical problem solved purely by the human mind. It is now something that we are using AI to help us. We actually just launched a product we call Nost AI, where we're working with Google to use Google's models to help us improve the efficacy and effectiveness. Because again, it's a swimming pool. We need to fill it up to the exact amount we need. And the more accurate we can be and more timely we can be in projecting what we're going to need, then the more effective we can be in terms of how we leverage the amount we put in. So AI really can help us right across the board. If you don't mind, can I give a long answer?
Yes, please.
So let me try and give you Dave's perspective of, through the lens of digital in the power grid, where we have opportunity. The easiest way to look at it is to describe what it is our utility customers have to do, right? And you can break that. I mean, it's a massively complex task they have. So please, if there are Duke people in the room, forgive me. But first and foremost, they have to manage and run that network, that electrical grid, right? That is their purpose. It's to deliver us the thing we need for our daily lives, which is power. So running that grid, job one. That grid itself, the electrons, they run across an infrastructure. So maintaining, optimizing, managing the infrastructure is two. And then, of course, they're an enterprise. They have to run their enterprise in a world that is changing rapidly around them, right? So if you look at those three buckets, we talked a little bit about AI and how it helps in that first layer, the control layer. That's moved from highly complex but relatively slow moving to massively complex, really fast moving. And that means that statement I made where AI can help humans make decisions in a very fast time frame that help us prevent escalating or cascading failures, or identifying where a failure might be occurring, or what we're doing to project and simulate what we need from a power perspective tomorrow. So there's lots and lots of opportunity in really the most complex but fundamental layer. The foundational layer of digital in the grid is our ability to control it all. Then if you look at what we're doing with the infrastructure, I talked earlier about the fact it's the most important innovation of the 21st century, but it's actually also been out there for most of the 21st century, which is, you know, some of it's as old as I am. And that's pretty old, by the way. So at the end of the day, we have to find a way to take this infrastructure that's been out there for decades, which we cannot rip and replace. We simply can't rip and replace it. We've got to make it more flexible. We've got to make it more resilient. We've got to extend its useful life. And that means we need to understand what it's doing, why it's doing it, how it's aging, how it's evolving, how it needs to evolve, right? Where am I going to connect the data center? So AI can help us across the board there. We're using models to help identify when things are going to fail. This thing's rattling, probably shouldn't be rattling. That's a bad sign, right? So we're using models to identify a whole spectrum of activity called asset performance management, where we are preventing failure by identifying what might fail and those indicators of failure. Beyond that now, of course, we're saying, you've got multiple alerts and alarms you need to deal with. Maybe go fix this one first, because downstream of that are some significant risks. That one can wait, right? Or there's a storm coming. It's a big storm. You probably need to worry about this and this because the risks downstream over there are more than over here. So AI helps us identify everything we need to do to optimize, maintain, and manage. And for our utility customers, of course, take cost out of that process, drive efficiency, if you will, into that process. And then lastly, there's the whole run their enterprise. Pretty much every one of our customers are on the same general journey when you look at the digital transformation, digital enablement, right? They want more insights into what's going on in their business. So I'm instrumenting all the assets in the field, and I'm bringing that data back to some central place where I'm deriving through analytics the value I need to solve my business problem. And I'm doing that across all my assets, and maybe I want to be able to look across my systems to manage risk at a system level. Storm-related stuff is not about which asset, it's about which downstream system is most at risk. So now I've moved from looking at my assets to looking at my systems, and in an ideal world, I'd take my operational stuff and I'd merge it with my enterprise knowledge, and I'd bring those value streams together, right? So now I've got multiple different data streams I'm bringing together. And what's happening to our customers is beyond that last statement. Every enterprise that you all represent is doing that today. But what's changing around our utility customers especially is all the new players that are playing in the market, data center players, who are draining their system. How on earth do I stay ahead of what's going on in that massively growing data center market? Independent power producers, a green community that has solar and runs electric buses and electric trains in its community. How do I interface with them? And by the way, they want to take their excess energy that they've been storing in the school bus system that sits there all day because they know they don't have to pick the kids up till 3 o'clock. They want to sell some of that energy, right? So now the utility has this huge ecosystem of new players in the market that they need to interface with. And many of them feel they want insights and activity associated to assets that historically were the utilities to manage. So you've got these three areas of massive opportunity for digitalization and AI to bring value: the control layer, the infrastructure, and the enterprise. That makes sense? That was a long answer, but did that make sense? Somebody nod. Give me some, there we go, feedback.
So I can't wait to ask some follow-up questions about that, because this is the part that gets me like so excited. But this is also the perfect time to sort of pause our interview for part one, and come back. Please come back for part two of our interview with Dave Goddard.
Thank you for joining us on Build What's Next, Digital Product Perspectives. If you would like to know more about how Method can partner with you and your organization, you can find more information at method.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on social and be sure to check out our monthly Tech Talks. You can find those on our website. And finally, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on any future episodes. We'll see you next time.